Welcome to the second season of Beyond Generations, an interview series. It's my journey of discovering what happened to Japanese American people during World War II and how people have been trying to acknowledge, understand, and learn from it and figure out how to connect it to the future. I am your host, Monica. Today's guest is Tamiko Nimura. She is a co-author of a graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration. She's also an organizer of the Annual Day of Remembrance in Tacoma and affiliate professor of urban studies at the University of Washington, Tacoma. In this episode, Tamiko will talk about how her Japanese American father made her proud of her heritage as a child and how she found her purpose and mission as a public historian. Let me take you along on my journey of discovery with Tamiko Nimura.
My name is Tamiko Nimura. I'm a creative nonfiction writer and public historian. I was born in California, in Northern California, but I now live in Tacoma, Washington.
So your name Tamiko is actually a Japanese name, right? And I have not met many. You're Sansei.
Yeah.
Sansei. Okay. Sansei, Yonsei generations of people who have the kind of Japanese name. So would you tell us a little bit about your Tamiko name, Tamiko?
Sure. So my dad was Nisei, but he married later than a lot of other Nisei. And so I was born in the early 1970s. So, a few decades after the incarceration, not, right after the incarceration. It was, as I understand it, a time when people were really starting to feel like their ethnic identities were something to be proud of, something to be accepted. And so when I was born, my father went to my Nisei uncle, my uncle Sumito, who gave me my name, Tamiko. I think he might have given my parents a few names to choose from, but they liked the meaning of my name, Tamiko, and they wanted to give me that. And the way that they told me and translated it was that it means most beautiful child, which as I grew up and started to learn kanji and the meanings of it, I think actually it means something like, child of many beauties, which is another way to think about it. But they always told me it was, no, it's most beautiful child. But I liked that. And I also have a middle name. It's Scottish. I was named after my father's favorite character in a musical, Fiona. So it's Tamiko Fiona Nimura. And then my father, whose name was Taku Nimura, he gave himself a middle name, Frank. So he was Taku Frank Nimura. And so I had his same initials. And my sister also has the initials TFN. So all three of us have the TFN initials in this very Japanese American story.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. So you told me about your father, Taku. Your father was a Japanese American, right?
Right.
Okay. Your mother?
So my mother was born in the Philippines, and she came to the United States in the early 1950s. And then she met my father I was probably around the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Your father passed away when you were very young, right?
Yeah, that's right. He died when I was 10 years old.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So was there any element of Japanese culture in your family when you were growing up, or more like a Filipino influence, Filipino culture was in your family, which was like stronger and things like that?
Yeah, definitely the Japanese cultural side was stronger, in part because my mother came to the United States when she was very young herself. And she was probably around 10 or so, 10 or 11 when she came to the United States. And she was adopted by her stepfather, who was in the US Army. And so they moved around a lot and they didn't have as much of a connection to a one particular Filipino American community. Whereas my dad, right, grew up here and had, a larger Japanese American family and to some extent a larger community. But we had, we had different kinds of food in our house, right? We had lots of Japanese American foods and we had Filipino foods. My dad learned how to cook, kind of Americana kinds of food. So he also taught my mom to cook a little bit as well. My dad read us, Japanese fairy tales, brought them home from the library. He played Japanese children's records for us, so that we would at least know the sounds, right, of what Japanese was. And then every year, my extended family, so my father's family and his siblings, they would come together for an oshogatsu, and have a really big potluck. It was quite elaborate. At one time, they, probably close to, 20, 25 people in a very small house, usually. And you would have, all kinds of, sushi and sashimi and tempura for that many people, which is a lot. And, lots of, gohan and namasu and a lot of the traditional, like the Thai, right, that you serve. With its tail, right, curved up to signify vitality. A lot of those kinds of traditional foods, we had that growing up as well. My larger city community, was predominantly white and Chicano, actually, or Latinx. And so there, we didn't have as much connection to a community within my town, which was Roseville, California. But we also got to go to the Placer Buddhist Church in Penryn, and had some of the connections to the Japanese American community there. And then we would go downtown to Sacramento, to the Nihon Machi there, and buy some of our foods, especially for those meals, right, at those stores.
Oh, that's great. So do you remember any of the Japanese fairy tales or Japanese music that
Yeah,
you listened to
yeah,
with your
yeah,
dad?
yeah,
Do
yeah.
you remember like some of them, like titles or
Yeah,
things like that?
yeah, yeah. He taught me how to sing Sakura very young, so I knew how to
The
sing it.
Sakura,
Yeah,
Sakura.
Sakura.
Oh, oh, beautiful.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
actually the song I remember the most. And we did go to Japan twice before he died. So I have very fond and vivid memories of those trips, being connected to our Japanese family there. We have family mostly in Hiroshima, which is where my grandparents immigrated from. But yeah, there's lots of songs. I'm trying to think, and yeah, the songs and the foods. And the family gatherings were the things that I remember the most about, feeling Japanese growing up.
Mm. Did you talk to your dad in Japanese or in English or
No,
mixture?
no, English,
English
English.
mostly
Yeah, yeah.
only.
Right, right. And my mom also, so we really only spoke English in our house, but there were ways that I think my parents tried to, like, give us a little bit of, those cultural things. And my dad actually used to come to my classrooms, like my school classrooms, and do different kinds of cultural demonstrations. Yeah. Through Kamina Yukata, right? And he would have different things from our house. He would do like a little, like, chopsticks demonstration. And sometimes if the kids were old enough, they got to like practice learning how to pick up things, right, with the chopsticks. We would have, what else? He probably had like a fan or something that he would show. Um, just different little like artifacts, I think, that were Japanese that he would talk about and demonstrate to them. And I'm really grateful that he was able to do those things. because it helped give me a sense of cultural identity and pride in that environment, right? Which was largely not Japanese. So, I kind of got this, had this feeling of, hey, it's kind of cool to be Japanese. I kind of had these, these things that I was connected to that my friends didn't necessarily know about.
What was it in your grade school when you were in
Yeah,
grade
grade
school?
school. Grade school.
Oh, okay. Do you remember how other kids took your father's demonstration? How did they take it?
As I remember, they were all pretty interested and excited about it. I still am in touch with some of my childhood friends who remember when they would, they remember him coming to our classes and doing demonstrations. One of the funny things he would do is he would come with, in his yukata, right? And he would hide some coins, right? In one of the sleeves, right? And he would pull that and, he would say, okay, what do you think is in here? And all the kids were like, many. And he would say, yes, that's what it is. And, people just thought that that was really cool and exciting. I was in the Girl Scouts when I was little also. And one of the things that he did was he translated, well, he didn't even translate. He basically made up a song, like an introduction song in Japanese, and we would sing it. We went and sang it like at the mall or something. But Japanese lyrics, and it was to the tune of London Bridge. And so it was this like, it was something like moshi moshi anone aso desu ka, like that. And, so we would go along and sing it. And, there was just me, my little, my little Asian self in, with my not Asian friends and Girl Scouts. But we would all be singing in Japanese, and that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a great story. And then your father, helped you feel proud and very comfortable in your Japanese identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he had to work hard for that, right? Coming out of the camps, right? And I think they had a hard time back in Placer County, which was pretty conservative and pretty white. And so they had, from what I understand, they had a hard time going to, high school and school there. And so for a while, my dad, I think, even dropped his first name Taku and he went by Frank for quite some time. And then after a while, he went by Taku Frank. And then by the time I was born, and maybe even a little later, he was more comfortable again with being just Taku. But I think even just those name changes, right, say a lot in his own sense of identity. And so, yeah, I have, some cousins who have names that are, more quote American, like, Raymond. But then I also have other cousins who were given Japanese first names. So in our family, that my sister and I are not the only cousins, not the only Sansei cousins who have Japanese first names.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about your father's camp experience because when you were a child, he was very positive about him being a Japanese American person, but he was
Right.
actually in a camp, right?
Yeah. So he was 10 when the war broke out, basically, and so it was him, his siblings, and his parents. So most of my aunts and uncles, as well as my grandparents, were all in camp.
Did you hear any camp stories from any of your relatives who were in camps?
You know, I don't remember stories so much at family gatherings. I remember them kind of talking about it in kind of a brief, glancing kind of way as a child. And then in my junior year of high school, I interviewed my oldest auntie about her camp experience. So I got to hear a lot more about that. And then um, as I got even older, I got to work with one of my uncles on his memoirs, and so I learned more about his camp stories through that experience. And when I was very young, I read my father's book that he never got published, but his book about his camp experience as well. He wrote it right around the time that I was being born, I think. So there's a page that I have in the manuscript where he dates it December 1973, and that's the month and the year that I was born. So he was, either, writing that section then or finishing the book around then or something like that. But I think he wanted to have something. And when I was about 8 or 9, I read that book, but I didn't quite understand it, right? I was pretty young, and that was one of the first times I'd heard about it. But um, I remember, trying to talk to him a little bit about it, and, he kind of gave it to me and said, okay, go read this. And I think I was kind of like, he said, so what did you think? And I was kind of like, well, I liked it, but like, what do you, when you're that young, I think it's hard to say very much, right? And to really understand the full story. Like, I didn't know, I think when I was that young, just how many folks, right, were incarcerated. I didn't know about the larger community story or where it fit into the larger narrative of American history, right? I was really young, so I didn't know about that for a long time.
Did you feel that your family members who were in the camp, were they like kind of willing to talk about it if you asked, or like, don't ask us kind of?
Yeah, no, they've always been pretty willing to talk about it. Maybe the one exception is one of my uncles who was in the military intelligence service. He never talked to me about his wartime experience before he passed away. And I think, I don't even know if he really talked about it with his own children. They were really kind of sworn to secrecy. They could not really tell, right, what they did during the war for a long time. So I didn't really hear about that. But I heard, whenever we've asked my relatives, my family members to talk about camp, they've usually been pretty open about it, which I know is kind of rare.
From what you told me about your father, like going to your school, doing demonstration on Japanese culture and things like that, I don't think it was like that in your family, but in some families, Japanese American families, especially Nisei parents, tried to make their children assimilate, like become
Right.
very American.
Yeah.
So what do
Yeah.
you think personally is a difference between those families who were, proud and open and, comfortable about being Japanese American and talk about their past experiences, between that and, not talk about it kind of family? What do you think is the difference?
Yeah, I do think that a big part of it, I think, is that my dad married later, that I was born later, that it was a different time, right? That, ethnic pride was more acceptable, right? More acceptable, even more fashionable, right? In some ways, it was kind of cool to be Japanese, and, there were, lots of like, sukiyaki restaurants, right, all over the place that were kind of popping up. And my dad made sukiyaki at home for, his friends who would come over. That, time, I think, was a big part of it. When I was born, it was more acceptable to be proud of who you were. I don't, I know had different struggles to fit in as a Nisei man, especially in the military. But I think because, again, if I wasn't born until the early 1970s versus, say, the 1950s, when conformity and assimilation would have been high priorities, right, for the Nisei coming out of camp. If I'd been born then, right, I don't know if I would have had the same sense of ethnic identity and ethnic pride. And I don't think he would have either. But he was so young and married late, and I was born so late. So I'm a really young sansei, right? And closer to a lot of yonsei.
Yeah, I was thinking, yes, you're very young for a sansei Japanese American. Yeah,
Yes.
almost like a yonsei generation, right?
Yeah. I'm closer to more yonsei in age.
So the time was different.
Yeah. I think the time. So yeah, I think it's, I'm not a typical sansei, right? I'm closer to yonsei.
I see. Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit about Tacoma.
Sure.
You're now living in Tacoma, right?
Uh-huh.
Yes. So tell us about the time you moved to Tacoma and you found out about people in Tacoma having been incarcerated during World War II, right? After you moved to Tacoma.
What I didn't know about is that we had such a large, thriving Japanese American community before the war. So I knew that there were Japanese Americans in Tacoma, or had kind of a vague sense that there were. I had a sense that, there was still a small community here. But what I didn't know is the extent and vibrancy of that community pre-war. So I moved to Tacoma in 2004, and I lived here for 10 years before I found out about Tacoma's Nihonmachi. It just really amazed me, and just, almost nothing physical, right, is left in the downtown core that would suggest that we had anything like that. So, there are cities, even Seattle, right, that have, more visible traces of a Nihonmachi, right? In Sacramento, even where I grew up, right, there was, still enough of, a presence so that there were a few, not even supermarkets, but like, food stores, right? And like import stores. So I remember going to those in Sacramento. And then, of course, there's San Francisco's Japantown that I grew up going to, especially in college. I remember that as being a very, vibrant, ongoing community. But what I didn't know is that Tacoma had a Japantown with so many Japanese-owned businesses and institutions. And it was a really well-developed one, too, that it wasn't just kind of a few stores here and there, right? There were, and not just kind of necessities, right? It was also, like restaurants and sweet shops and photography studios. These are things that suggest that, people are, kind of here for a longer term, right? And that they're here and, dedicated to really making, building a life and a community here. And that's the part that I didn't know about our downtown core. I mean, I'd been through the downtown core hundreds of times, right? By the time I learned we had this Nihonmachi. And then when I learned that we had, that I found this map, this hand-drawn map by a Japanese journalist named Kazuo Ito. And I looked at the map, and there were all these Japanese names on it, attached to buildings, right? Or, addresses. And it just took my breath away. I don't think it's something that has ever quite left me. And what we know now is that map has there are lots of questions behind that map, right? And we don't know exactly where Ito got his information. I'm not saying that it's not accurate, but we don't know like the directories or the people that he talked to, or, like, what was the Buddha symbol really here? Or was the, there are lots of things that, lots of questions behind that map, but it's still a really powerful image of how vibrant this community was before the war.
There was a Japanese language school there?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there was a really thriving Japanese language school in Nihongo Gakko. And it was a really interesting community institution. A lot of Japanese language schools, I think, were attached to, different religious institutions, right? So temples or churches. But this one in Tacoma was unique because both Buddhist and Christian students went there. It was kind of a gathering place, across the denominations. So that was one place where the community really came together, right? To both to build it, but also to maintain it, to have the supplies and all of those things.
After you moved to Tacoma in 2004, you started the Day of Remembrance in Tacoma, right?
Yes, but years after, right? So a good probably 10.
Oh, years after that. Okay, tell us about the Day of Remembrance in Tacoma.
Sure. So let's see. I think we started in 2016. I started my research on Tacoma's Japanese American history in 2014, 2015, I think. Again, I'm so bad at dates, but this is why I tell people I'm not a great historian, because dates are not are not what I remember. But so I started researching Tacoma's Japanese American history for the state online encyclopedia called HistoryLink, where I was asked to write the history of the neighborhood. And so in writing the history of the neighborhood, and then in learning about the Tacoma Japanese language school at around the same time, I just kind of became obsessed. And so I believe it was 2016, My colleague and friend Michael Sullivan, who's a Tacoma historian, was invited to do a walking tour of Tacoma's Nihonmachi. And he had been doing his own research and work on historic preservation and the Japanese Americans in Tacoma. So he knew enough to be able to do that tour, but I did not really. We'd done a little bit of research together on one building. But he said, would you like to, join me on, giving this walking tour? And I said, I would love to. I don't know very much about doing this, but, you can teach me. And so to commemorate, goodness, it would have been the 75th, I think, anniversary of Executive Order 9066. We were basically set to do this walking tour of Nihonmachi. The group that's now called Tacoma Arts Live had asked Michael to do this tour. They had also commissioned a play called Nihonjin Face about the Japanese in Tacoma. And so they said, to Michael, can you give this tour? And so we, showed up on this very cold February day. And we thought, if 25 people show up, that'll be a great tour. But 90 people showed up to that very first tour. And we were so shocked and delighted and amazed. And that told us that a lot of people really wanted to know more about the stories of Japanese Americans in Tacoma. So after that, we started giving a few more tours. We worked with an organization called Downtown on the Go and gave the tour twice in 2 years, and each time close to 250 people showed up to to these tours. Again, just really interested in knowing about this kind of varied layer of the downtown history. Day of Remembrance, though, came about in part because Michael knew that every year the Japanese American community holds in February a Day of Remembrance to commemorate the signing of Executive Order 9066. And after that first walking tour, Michael said, maybe we should do a Day of Remembrance in Tacoma. We should really, stand at Union Station where those Tacomans, departed on the trains and, feel the impact of that moment. And I said, that's a great idea. We should. But, February had already passed. And we said, well, maybe we should do it, right around the time that they were evicted in May, which gave us a very short amount of time. But the Washington State History Museum actually partnered with us, and they, gave us a space and resources to host it. And so we began our first Day of Remembrance then in May 2016 on the days that the Tacoma Japanese Americans left. So I think it was May 17th was the first one that we did. And so we've done something every year since then. During COVID, we did some online programs and talks. Different arts organizations have stepped up to either perform a play for us or do a screening of Nihonjin Face. And so I've taken some responsibility to try and have the city remember that occasion every year, but also to mix it up a little bit every year so that people who come aren't expecting exactly the same thing, and that people don't get tired of the same story. But we always try to really connect it back to Tacoma history to tell the larger story of camp. And also the History Museum also has had different kinds of exhibits, including one permanent one about the history of camp and the incarceration in Washington State.
So if I remember it correctly, this year's the Day of Remembrance in Tacoma, the theme was like focusing on younger generation, was it?
Yeah.
So would you tell us a little bit more about why you chose that theme this year?
Yeah, I wanted to focus on youth, and I wanted to focus on remembrance, partly because I noticed that the people who had been coming tended to be, older folks, which is great. We love them coming. But I also want people who are younger to, my kids' age, right? They're teenagers, to know more about this history and to remember it. We're also across the street from the History Museum is UW-Tacoma, and I wanted to really try to draw people from that community into Day of Remembrance. And youth are such an important part of carrying on that memory and sustaining it. If I only do Day of Remembrance for older folks, then that means that at a certain point, right, that younger folks are not going to feel included or interested. So I really want to try to target younger folks in bringing this history to life.
Great idea. So what kind of reaction, what kind of feedback and comments did you get from younger people this year after the Day of Remembrance in Tacoma?
I didn't get to talk to as many of them as I would have liked, but there were professors who brought their students from Tacoma to different programs. When we did a kind of soft launch of the Tacoma Japantown website that I've been working on with a team of in part students and fairly recent graduates from UW Tacoma and UPS. The people who the students and kind of former students, recent students, said that they really enjoyed participating in the project, that they found it really interesting and they thought it was really meaningful as well. And I'm trying to think of who else. And we had some activities, right, for some of the younger kids, right? We partnered a little bit with the Tacoma Children's Museum and did a little story time and had some coloring pages and some origami at the Day of Remembrance. Again, just to get people, there to see the exhibits and the programs that we had that day.
I see. And then going back to your Tacoma walking tour, it was a big success, too big a success. And then you made a smartphone app for a self-guided walking tour of Tacoma's historic Japantown. Tell us a little bit about the smartphone app for the self-guided walking tour of Tacoma.
Yeah, after that very first walking tour, we realized very quickly that we could not, we only had, the two of us, no microphones. And, we had our two little tablet, iPads, right, with some photos to show people. But, we could not project as well as we wanted to. And we couldn't show people, all the people, the photos and everything. So my husband is a composer and a software developer. And he said, let me make you an app. And so Michael and I said, great. So I kind of curated some of the content, and Michael had some input about, some of the stops and what we put on, each stop with the app. And so my husband created this app that has about, I think, 8 or 10 stops where Michael and I would have taken people, but there are contemporary and historic photos on the app of some of the places where we show people. And then if there is written content, like the History Link article that I wrote about the neighborhood, or the Buddhist temple that I co-wrote with Justin Wadland, anything like that, there are links in that application to the written content that gives you more context about each stop. It's a little bit dated, though. We need to update it a bit more, but I've been working on the website. So that will be the next thing. But if you look up Tacoma Japantown walking tour, then you can find our application. It's free, and it's for iPhone and for Android. And then in the late fall, probably late October, early November, we will do a website launch, also called Tacoma Japantown, which will have even more content, maps, historic photos, story maps, content about and from the book Becoming Nisei by Professors Lisa Hoffman and Mary Hanneman, links to interviews with the Tacoma Language School students that the UW library digitized from the interviews that the students did with the professors at UW. So lots and lots more. The stories just keep coming, and the photos and the descendants keep, going through their grandparents and parents' belongings and boxes, and more things keep coming out.
Wow, it's exciting. Wow. So did you say this website will be launched sometime this fall?
Yeah, we did a soft launch at the Day of Remembrance this year.
So it's already accessible.
Yeah, it is, but it's not done.
But it's coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. So now you have become very active in raising awareness about the wartime incarceration, and you have made an app, you did a walking tour, the Day of Remembrance, and you showed up in media, and also you co-authored a book, We Hereby Refuse, a lot of things. It seems like your creative focus has become more on the wartime incarceration over time. To me, it looks like your focus got stronger and stronger over time.
Yeah.
So how do you describe your journey? Like why, how it happened? Would you describe the journey?
Yeah. So let me think. The story of incarceration is always something that's been pretty important to me because it's been so important to so many members of my family. So it's something that I learned about, knew about as a child. In college, I wrote my honors thesis about Japanese American sansei writers, women writers who wrote about camp. So that was always there. And then going into graduate school, I wouldn't say that I took a detour, but it was a kind of a broader focus for a while. So I focused on Asian American and African American literatures, especially. And when I taught for a little while as an English professor, I would teach American ethnic literatures quite often. So again, that sort of broader focus was there. And then when I left academia, one of the ways that I think helped me find a purpose, a way to serve my community, was through these forms of public history, from writing kind of the more emotionally in-depth pieces, creative essays about what it was to be someone who inherited the legacy of the incarceration. And I have really become interested in how we process that legacy, right? That it's really something that in some ways the community is still coming to terms with, that the community is still reckoning with and healing from. And so that has become really I think sort of maybe not my end goal, but really a powerful focus for me now, bringing those stories to light, and showing how the legacy of the incarceration still echoes quite powerfully into our present day. And not just for those whose relatives were in camp, right? I think it really is for our society, which is why I think, the story of Tacoma has been so powerful for me, though my family is not from Tacoma. I think just the sort of lack of larger awareness around Tacoma's, Japanese American history has mirrored in some ways the lack of awareness around Japanese American history in American society, right? Or, there are lots of people who are, from the Midwest or from the East Coast who either have never heard of the incarceration, or if they have, it was a very, kind of small mention, right, in a textbook or something like that. And then when people come to find that they really, there's so much more to know about it, that it wasn't just a kind of blip in American history, then they too become really obsessed with how powerful this history still lingers today.
I see. So your focus, started from more like a personal now to like for a wider community.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh,
yeah, that's beautiful. And now you are working on your father's memoir?
Right. So I'm working on my own memoir that incorporates my father's memoir.
That book.
Yes.
Incorporating that book your father gave to you long time ago.
That's right.
Oh, your own memoir incorporating
That's
your
right.
father's memoir. Like a family project.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So is it going to be like a book? Are you going to publish a book, or it's still like
no. I've been working on it for a really long time. But right now, as of 2023, it is called A Place for What We Lose, an Asian American memoir of reckoning and resilience. So that is the working title right now. It's the story of how losing my job as a professor forced me to reckon with a lot of grief around my father's death when I was very young, around becoming, something else and turning to a different career as a writer and a public historian, and how it led me ultimately to go on a community pilgrimage to the site where my family members were incarcerated. And then, to rereading his book and to really reckon with what it was to lose him so young.
And like a person's life journey is really magical, isn't it? You never know what takes you to the real purpose of your life. You never know.
It's very true. I would never have guessed that public history would be something that I that I would say. Truly, like literature is my first love, right? So literature and stories, and because of my training in American ethnic studies, which I got partly from my undergraduate education and partly from my graduate school education, that's that interest in bringing hidden stories to light, raising awareness and having that kind of activist bent, right, to all of that knowledge, really is something that influenced me and pulled me into public history. But I never would have said, I would be a public historian if you'd asked me 10 years ago. I would just, I would say, oh no, that's not my training. That's not my, I'm not a historian in all these ways. But I've come to claim that a bit more recently as something that I do, which is history that is made accessible and public facing, right, for broader audience.
What do you think we should learn from the history of the Japanese American incarceration that happened during World War II? What should we learn from it?
Oh goodness, I know there's so many things. So I will say that I have many answers, right? One of them is, of course, that we have to be so careful about what we are doing now that follows those same kinds of paths around family separation and deportation and xenophobia and fear of the other and telling accurate histories. But I think one of my main purposes most recently has been to show that these kinds of incidents in history have very, very long repercussions, echoes, that they last not just for the generation that it's happening to, right, but for the generations that come after those generations, right? So, a lot of people, I think, tend to think that the Japanese American incarceration was this kind of blip, and then look how well Japanese Americans came back from that, right? All the model minority myth and all of that stuff. But what I hope to show in more of my recent work is that these kinds of historical traumas last a very long time throughout generations, not just one generation. And so if you are doing something terrible, like separating migrants from children at the borders, that will affect not just the migrants, not just their children, but it will affect the children of those children and for decades to come. And so I really want us to think about the long term, that, you are harming generations of children to come. And that's what I want people to think about.
What we do and what we let happen today will affect future generations, years and decades to come. This awareness helps us make right decisions and take right actions, not only for ourselves, but for the next generation. like Tamiko does, passing down and sharing the history of Japanese Americans with a wider audience is one thing. What role do you think you can and you want to play? Special thanks to Tamiko Nimura. Music by Zakar Balaha. I hope you enjoyed the very first episode of the Season 2 of Beyond Generations, the interview series. Join our community on Instagram at beyondgenerations.seattle for updates and extras. Thank you for listening and see you next time. This is Monica. You have been listening to Beyond Generations. My journey of discovery will continue.